Hey everybody, it's Dr. Eric Balcavage. We're back for episode 4 of the Thyroid Thursday series, 12 reasons people struggle to get well and what to do about it. So we're on to number 3, and I think this is a biggie, and this is mistaking the manipulation of lab values with healthcare or root cause care. So this just happened the other day. Somebody in functional medicine space called me and said, don't you think the values for TSH are too broad, 0.45 to 4.5? She said, I think that TSH should be in between 1 and 2. What do you think? Don't you think that's where it should be? And I said, I don't know. If you give medication to put TSH into that range of 1 to 2 and the patient feels and functions better, then maybe that is the appropriate range. But if the TSH is out of the range and the person is hypothyroid, and I force that TSH back into range with a medication, whether it's T4, T3, a combination of those, and the value is now between 1 and 2 and the patient doesn't feel well, did I really help them out? Did I really improve their health? Is that really health care? I don't think so. And so what we need to consider is that just because we can manipulate a value into range doesn't mean we're addressing the root cause of care, doesn't mean we're actually doing health care. We see this with statins that force cholesterol back into a certain reference range, right? Cholesterol under 200, oh, it's gotta be healthy. Why? Because it's under 200, but we still see just as many people having cardiovascular issues, even now with suppressed cholesterol levels. And it doesn't address the root issue. Like, why is cholesterol elevated? Cholesterol is elevated because the mitochondria aren't working. Food energy is not going to make cellular energy, it's being shifted out to make cholesterol, and then we don't have sufficient physiology going on to pull the cholesterol out of the bloodstream, make our cortisol, make our DHEA, make our progesterone, to pull into the liver, to make bile, to make healthy cell membranes. So it builds up in the bloodstream. So we can make it artificially look better, but have we really addressed the root issue? I don't think so. We see this with blood sugar regulation. Somebody's got high fasting glucose, maybe insulin resistance, we can give them medications that lower the glucose. Is it better for them to not have really high glucose? Sure. But does artificially changing the fasting glucose level with a medication improve their physiology? Does it help them change the behaviors and habits that created? Does it help them reduce the inflammation that created that problem to begin with? No, it does not. If somebody's got high blood pressure and we give them blood pressure medication, are they safer with the blood pressure medication? Maybe, but does putting them on that blood pressure medication address the root issue? It does not. Does it have risks or consequences? It does. And so what we often see with people with blood pressure medication is they take one for a while, it seems to help for a while, then they need a stronger dose or a second one or a third one because the body wanted to increase the blood pressure for a reason, and we're working against the body. Forcibly changing lab values, even if we're pushing that value into what's considered the optimal range, may not be optimal for somebody's health. That's an important point when we're considering why somebody might struggle to get better. Let me give you an example. When somebody's diagnosed with hypothyroidism, right, TSH is high, free T4 is low, and somebody says, hey, I'm gonna give you T4, sufficient amount of T4 to raise your T4 and to bring that TSH back into the lab reference range, maybe back into the optimal range of 1 to 2, and for some doctors, they wanna drive it under 1 with their dose of T4. Now, just because TSH is in that normal range or in the optimal range or even below the 1.0 range, does the person always feel better? Oftentimes, initially they feel a bit better, but then they start to have the same signs and symptoms. Why? Because in many cases, when somebody's got primary hypothyroidism, that's the end phase of a thyroid condition. I talk about in the thyroid debacle, the continuum of hypothyroidism. Typically, hypothyroidism starts at the cell and tissue level, then triggers the thyroiditis, then we get the glandular hypothyroidism. So the glandular hypothyroidism is the end stage. So we make the assumption that if I just put enough thyroid hormone T4 into the system and it lowers TSH, that means I've created well-being in all the rest of the cells and tissues, but it often does not. You can have a temporary bump, but then what happens? The person needs a stronger dose, and then they go stronger dose, and then they feel hyperthyroid, and they reduce the dose, and they feel hypothyroid, and they just keep bouncing back and forth until they get extremely frustrated. Then they go to a functional practitioner who says, hey, I'm gonna run more than a TSH and a free T4. I'm gonna run T3 and free T3 and reverse T3 and thyroid antibodies, and they say, oh, you have Hashimoto's, and you don't convert T4 to T3 well, you're over converting that T4 to reverse T3, and reverse T3 is blocking receptors and preventing T3 from working, which is technically not true at all. But they decide that what they're going to do is they're just going to give you T3. And if I give you enough T3 to normalize the blood, then that should mean I've created tissue optimization of thyroid status. And initially the person will feel good oftentimes, and then they'll plateau, and then they'll not feel good again, and then they'll need a stronger dose, and then they'll feel a bit better and then plateau. And they ride the same roller coaster, whether it's with T4 and T3, T4 only or T3 only. But just because we artificially improve lab values, even if we're pushing them into the optimal range, it doesn't mean we've addressed the root cause. The root cause of symptoms of hypothyroidism when you're taking T4 medication and your T3 is low and your reverse T3 is high is not the high reverse T3. That is not the culprit. It's not blocking the nuclear receptors from working. The root issue is there's something triggering cellular inflammation. There's something triggering the downregulation of the cell metabolism. There's something actively saying, hey, we don't want to convert the T4 to T3 and increase the metabolism. We actually want to slow down the metabolism of the cell, and we're going to do that by deactivating the T4 to something called reverse T3. That same thing can happen when you go on T3 medication. That T3 can be deactivated to forms of T2. So the same thing is going on. We haven't addressed the root cause, and people get really frustrated. Like, I've done everything I can do. I've taken T4, it hasn't worked. I've taken T4 and T3, it hasn't worked. I've taken high dose T3 and it hasn't worked. And maybe they've all worked temporarily, but then they're right back into the same scenario where they feel like crap. So manipulating lab values, whether it's with a drug or sometimes even with a supplementation, is not root cause medicine from a functional medicine standpoint. We have to ask the question, why is this going on? What is causing my body to adapt this way? What is causing my body to not use the glucose that I consume or the food energy I consume? Why is it storing it? Why is my metabolism slowing down? Is it bacteria? Is it toxins? Is it emotional stress or trauma? Like, what is it in my life that's creating so much stress and strain on my cells and tissues that my cells and tissues are increasing inflammation, that they're down-regulating metabolism, they're damaging the thyroid gland to reduce the overall production of hormone, they're raising my blood pressure to get more blood flow to the tissues? Why is this occurring? If you don't ask that question and you only manipulate lab values, you're not going to have long-term success for an extended period of time. You can have periods of temporary improvement, but you're probably not going to have long-term success. So this was number 3 on the 12 reasons why people struggle to get well and stay well. If you have any questions, put them below wherever you watch the video, and stay tuned for episode number 4 of the 12 reasons people struggle to get well and what to do about it.